I don't know if you've been following it, but nearly $1 billion in a private sole-sourced, no-competition deal have been agreed to by Trudeau to his favorite PR group called We Day. That's run by the Kielburger brothers. It's basically huge liberal-style rallies in stadiums where Trudeau or his wife or other liberal celebrities are introduced to young high school kids. It's basically conditioning them to support liberals. Trouble is, Trudeau has sent them close to $1 billion to manage a volunteer program. Who ever heard of volunteers being paid? There's so many iffy and sketchy things here, including the fact that We Day just happens to have paid for Sophie Trudeau and the kids and the mother-in-law to have an all-expense-paid trip to London. Isn't that cozy? It reminds me, and we should remember, that Trudeau is a serial convict under the Conflict of Interest Act, as ruled by a quasi-judge, the Federal Ethics and Conflict of Interest Commissioner. And that brings us to our story today. You know, we have a number of fan favorite guests, and you'll immediately know who I'm talking about when I start to describe him. He's a very senior hand who likes to take the wide view. And when you take the wide view, you see not just the politics, but also the economics, the law, the foreign affairs, the diplomacy. And it helps to have that wide view sometimes, especially after we go so deep on some particular detail down the rabbit hole. And it won't surprise you that our guest today is a former managing partner of a national law firm, former lawyer to Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and he's now the boss of Think Sharp. I'm talking about our friend, Manny Montenegrino, who joins us now via Skype from Ottawa. Manny, great to see you again. And you've compiled another one of your master's theses on politics and Trudeau. Why don't you just have at it, and we're going to sit back and learn and listen.
Sure. Thank you, Ezra. Nice being with you. What I'd like to talk about today, and thank you for the opportunity, is the two Michaels, Michael Sporver and Michael Korvik, who are now, I think, 560 days in a Chinese lockup. And there's been a lot of media with respect to that and how do we deal with it and our independence of law. And you know that I have been, at least on your show, every opportunity I get is to talk about the two Michaels and how they've been ignored. And recently you've seen that there's a lot of media about the government having the ability to, under the Extradition Act, we've got a brilliant decision by Brian Greenspan that the Justice Minister can intervene, and Trudeau's holding out that he will not intervene because of the independence of the judiciary. So it's a tough issue, and you know, clearly the human part of me wants these two Michaels back. The legal aspect of it, clearly we should not monkey around with our independence of the judiciary. That's what keeps Canada by far one of the greatest countries in the world. So how do you square these? And I've gone through the last little while and the last 3 years of how do we make a decision from this information? And so we start back. I mean, Ezra, first of all, I'm no fan of the communist China. They have been doing as much illegality around the world as they can, when and if they can. And we're seeing what's happening in Hong Kong. 6 million people have lost their rights, their human rights, and 300,000 of them are Canadians, and the world is pretty silent about it. So when I look at that, how do you square? How do I square the fact that these two Michaels, these two Canadians should be back in Canada and observe the rule of law that is so important to Canada, and there should never be any interference by political interference? Well, you know, in this case here, you look at the totality of it, and it's quite simple. There has to be an admission by the Prime Minister that his conduct must compel these two young men back home, and must, in this specific fact situation, must have the Minister of Justice deal with the issue of interfering. And here's what I mean. Brian Greenspan made a wonderful argument that in law, there is the legal ability for the Minister of Justice to get involved. But there has to be a compelling reason why. And the compelling reason why, in this case, points directly to the Prime Minister. He has conducted himself in such a way many times, and you referred to it in the open monologue, his breaches of ethics, his breaches of obstruction of law, that gives the right to use that clause in the Extradition Act. And you might recall, Ezra, September, it goes back to September 2018, 5 months, 10, 11 people at the PMO obstructing and putting pressure on the Attorney General on criminal matters that dealt with SNC-Lavalin. That led to his best friend, his parliamentary secretary resigning, Butts, the clerk of the Privy Council resigning, the firing of the Attorney General, and all that. That played out publicly. China saw that. And what offends me the most is that there is no discussion in the media that a huge precedent was created by this particular Prime Minister that can't no longer hide behind we cannot interfere with legal matters before the courts. He interfered time and time again. And so for those reasons, I think, and China watched it. China watched the unraveling of our justice system with the firing of the Attorney General, the quitting of the MP, and all that happened underneath. And as well as you put it, the ethics commissioner, Mario Dion, does a very detailed review and finds that there's a second conflict of interest in an obstruction of justice, the Prime Minister personally trying to help a criminal matter.
Am I understanding you right? You're saying, and I want to make sure I get this.
Yeah.
You are saying, are you, that Canada should do what Brian Greenspan and the 19 senior ex-judges and lawyers and professors and diplomats are saying? Are you advocating that Trudeau have the justice minister set Meng Wanzhou, the Chinese CFO and executive, free in return for the two Michaels? Are you supporting that proposal?
No, okay, I'm getting to the same conclusion, but they are not brave enough or honest enough to get to the conclusion on how I got to the conclusion. So they're coming, it offends me to see that a bulk of our ex-Liberal cabinet ministers and even the ex-prime minister is now on retainer with China. It bothers me that there's China gave $200,000 to the Trudeau Foundation. It bothers me that China is so infiltrated within our government that it uses its funds and ability to shape the policies of Canada. I am coming to the same conclusion as they are, but I'm coming to it honestly. I'm coming to it with great difficulty, but with using the law and the facts of this particular case. And here's what I mean, Ezra. There's no instance, almost never should the government be involved in involving itself in a matter before the courts. But in this rare and exceptional case, where you have the Prime Minister of Canada found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner of conflict of interest in the guise of an obstruction of justice, when you have the Prime Minister taking money, or his family trust or his family fund taking money from the Chinese, when these facts are there, and the Chinese Communist government is watching, and the Chinese government is watching and saying, we see what you have done. We see that you've been found guilty. This is the way we do business here. This is the way you do business here. So why not? And my point is, if I were arguing for the Michaels, I wouldn't be arguing that, the law is there, but where is the opportunity? Where are the facts to find itself within the law? And the opportunity in facts is that the Prime Minister of Canada personally was found to be in conflict of interest with the SNC Levant, removed the Attorney General. That's never happened in Canada's history. He was not investigated by the RCMP, and there's we see what's happening with the commissioner today. We know now why. But there is enough legal jurisprudence by the decision, as you put it, by the commissioner, Mario Dion, where he finds an obstruction. So when I look at, should the law be applied? Should the exemption be applied under the Extradition Act? The answer is always no. So I would be always saying never get yourself involved. But in this particular case, because of the facts, where the Prime Minister personally obstructed justice, where the Prime Minister was found to be in conflict of interest for obstruction of justice, where the Prime Minister acted so recklessly that the clerk of the Privy Council had to resign, where the Principal Secretary had to resign, where the Attorney General was removed from her post, where the Minister of, at that time, the Minister of Health quit and resigned, Jane Philpott, because of the obstruction. When all these facts are there and the world knows it, and China knows it, China is saying, hey, we took these kids because we thought you'd understand. You're the same as we are. So for their case, I would argue the facts that are so egregious and offensive, and should be offensive to every Canadian that believes in the rule of law, the facts in this case here should permit these two Michaels to come home.
Manny, I agree with you in one way, which is that China senses Trudeau is weak and corrupt, so they thought this gambit would work.
Right.
They would never do this against Donald Trump.
Right.
So I accept your thesis that Trudeau's history of corruption, his history of interfering with the justice system, may have given China courage to do this kidnapping. I accept that. But the second part, Manny, I don't think I've ever disagreed with you in the 2 decades we've known each other.
Right.
But I have to disagree with you here in such a friendly and respectful way.
Sure.
Because just because China thought our whole system was corrupt, because Trudeau tried to corrupt it once, doesn't mean we should make that true and make it corrupt.
I agree.
And let me throw 2 more things at you.
Sure.
I'd like you to answer these points.
Sure.
I'll be brief, and I want to hear from you because I want to give you a chance to respond to the 2 key points. One is, I think it is morally inappropriate to interfere with our justice system. It'll have a domino effect. Other politicians will do it at other levels of the government, will change the public civic duty in this country if we be so brazen about it. I'm worried it'll ruin our reputation for rule of law morally. And number 2, we'll send a message to every would-be kidnapper thug around the world that all you have to do is kidnap someone and we'll break our own laws for it. So it's not just the moral reasons we don't want to corrupt our system. It's, as Rudyard Kipling said, once you pay the Dane Geld, you'll never get rid of the Dane, talking about paying ransom to Vikings. Well, they'll keep coming back. So I hear what you're saying strictly as a thought exercise, but in real life to actually say, hey, release the prisoner, even though a court just ruled she should stand trial, is not only damaging to the rule of law, but it sends a signal to the world, you can push us around. What do you make of those 2 objections, Manny?
Those are, I agree, Ezra, 100% of what you said. And in the normal course, I would agree. I'm talking about the specific facts of this case here. The specific facts, we've never had a prime minister, ever, and we will never have a prime minister ever found in conflict of interest, obstruction of justice. But we did, and we have. And he continues to do it, as with his conflicts. He's now, I think, 13 charges were found under this section on 2 different, very lengthy legal opinions by the ethics commissioner, and he continues. But where you have that, and Ezra, here's where I struggled as much as you did with this. But in this case here, I liken it to the fact where you have a bad cop or a bad investigator that comes in and breaks one's charter rights. and the Charter of Rights, and let's say they go in without a warrant, and they find guns and they find all the incriminating evidence, but they break the Charter of Rights of that individual gets to walk. He gets to get a stay where you act. So what's more important to me is where you have here, in this case here, and if there's such a concept, the Prime Minister of Canada breaching the Charter of Rights of these two individuals by acting so negligently and forcefully, creating obstruction of justice to allow rogue regimes like China to act upon it, there's where the exemption falls. I mean, it's the facts in this case that drive me to that conclusion. I would be, Ezra, I'm exactly like you. Forever and a day, we protect our justice system. But when the Prime Minister abuses the justice system and two young men are in jail because of his conduct and his acts, those men stand above because of the egregious acts of the Prime Minister. So, that's where I come from.
If the Prime Minister's egregious acts had touched the Meng Wanzhou case, I could understand it, because that would be like your analogy. If a cop breaks a rule during an arrest, the perp walks free even if they really shouldn't. But Trudeau's shenanigans didn't have anything to do with Meng Wanzhou. They're just taking China took an opportunistic attack. I don't know, Manny. I'm unpersuaded, and actually, I have to tell you, I mean, I criticize Trudeau so full-time. It's like a full-time job for me. My last 3 books in a row, trumping Trudeau, the Libranos, and now China virus, they're all criticizing Trudeau. I'm second to none on that. But I will give the lad credit for one thing. When he was presented with this 19 signatures, including a former Supreme Court judge saying, do the prisoner swap, he actually, to my shock, rejected it. And I thought, you know what? That's the first thing I can think of in 5 years that not only is he right, but he did with a little bit of courage. And I don't know, I just feel like I see you want them back and you're trying to, like a good lawyer, come up with some thread to do it. But just from a principled reason, and I tell you, you do that. Not only does China crow, we handle Canada, we boss Canada around, we won the staring contest with Canada, but they're going to take another hostage the next day and see what they can get from that. And maybe Iran will take a hostage. Well, and maybe Russia will take a hostage. And before you know it, everyone knows you can, under Justin Trudeau, you can take a hostage and get what you want.
Ezra, that's so true. And that's the risk that you put yourself when you have what I'll call an errant Prime Minister at the helm. I mean, we are at risk to everything. If you honestly believe, and Ezra, you're way too smart for this. If you honestly believe that Justin Trudeau has now found a spine and a dose of honesty to reject what was presented to him to stand for justice, you know that's not true. You know this all is staged. This is all staged to make Justin Trudeau undo the damage that he did for 10 years, for the few years with the Attorney General. This is all staged. It has nothing to do with those two young men. This is to build a re-reputation of Trudeau, pretend that he is a defender of justice, and he's not. Because you cannot be a defender of justice, even to this day. Ezra, I mean, come on. You're better than this. Even to this day, the guy's giving out $1 billion to the We Foundation after he's gone through the whole affair and found in his first conflict of interest when he went to the Aga Khan's Island, the very same problem. He gave $40 million, should have recused himself. He shouldn't have been there. Now we have direct evidence that he did call. There was a call and there's $1 billion given. So he is not concerned about justice, ethics, or duty. He's now going to be reported again for this issue. And I'm sure the We Foundation, the commissioner, will find that he breached his duties again. He is not concerned about justice. This is a reputation building by his what I'll call the liberal gang, the liberal elite, to make him look strong on justice. I don't buy it a bit, Ezra. I'm still thinking of those two young men that were put in this position because directly related to the Prime Minister's Act. And for that reason, the Prime Minister, here's what should happen, Ezra. In my view, what should happen, our media should at least and I say media excludes Rebel and you guys because you're doing a job that is incredible, but the rest of the 99% paid media, what they should be doing is be honest. These two young men are in trouble because the prime minister acted recklessly and there should be a call for him to say, I screwed up, I acted recklessly. There is a decision by the ethics commissioner that says I obstructed justice because of my conduct. These two men are there and I have to get them back. That's what has to happen. It's through his direct actions that these two young men are found and now charged. I'm sure China is just beside themselves saying, hey, why isn't this guy doing it? Look at his record. He's still doing it with the We Foundation. This is the same guy. So this is not a man that's concerned about justice. If he was concerned about justice, there wouldn't be 15 guilty pleas under the 15 different sections of the Conflict of Interest Act. He wouldn't have members of cabinet that were also found guilty in conflict of interest. This is not a man of justice. This is not a man of concern of justice. With respect to, on another issue, we are in a pandemic. And the pandemic, we slammed the curve, I would say, around April or so. When was the last time anyone talked about, when did this prime minister, talk about the Charter of Rights of Individuals? Yeah. It wasn't even mentioned.
Yeah, well, he's all holed up in, I call it self-hiding. It's not even self-quarantine, he's just hiding from the world, living like a recluse. It's very strange. Well, Manny, listen, I appreciate you making the case. I myself have to tell you, I am not convinced, but it was an excellent exercise. You would make an outstanding law school professor because you certainly make students think. I'm going to invite our viewers to weigh in with their thought on your approach. I'm a skeptic. You heard my reasons why. Send me a note to Ezra at rebelnews.com and I'll read some of the replies on tomorrow's show. In the meantime, Manny, always an education, always a thought-provoking conversation, and we love you, and we can hardly wait to talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Ezra.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.